Welcome to today's episode of Sparks by PRCA. The new series, hosted by the PRCA Equity and Inclusion Advisory Board, explores key issues across religious beliefs, gender, age, LGBTQIA, neurodiversity, and mental health. In this episode, we're diving into why many DEI programs focus heavily on race, gender, sexuality, and neurodiversity, while religious identity remains the silent diversity. According to research, 85% of employees globally identify with a religious belief, with only 6% claiming to be non-religious. However, despite this huge majority of faith-based employees, a separate study found that people of all faiths felt as if they were in the minority in the workplace. It found that, in fact, nearly half of employees of faith felt uncomfortable discussing religious festivals that they celebrated at work, and over a third experienced backlash from managers when they wanted to take time off for religious festivals. In addition to this, only a quarter of those who wear religious symbols or dress were prepared to do so at work. In fact, almost a third of people felt that expressing their religious beliefs at work led to negative outcomes, including mockery, antagonism, and discrimination. All this suggests perhaps that despite the giant strides being made within DEI for gender, race, neurodivergency, and LGBTQIA+ equality, there's much work to do for those with religious beliefs to also feel included. With me to explore why religious identity is still the silent diversity and what we can do about it is Binna Kandola, author of the research I've just been quoting, as well as several books on the subject of bias in the workplace, and Mikhail Osman, former global head of company culture for TikTok and recently named as one of the official top 25 diversity and inclusion speakers in the world. Welcome to both of you, and thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me.
We're going to jump right in with my first question. Religious identity is often referred to as I mentioned, the silent diversity. What does that phrase mean to each of you, and why do you think it resonates so strongly in today's workplace?
You can actually have a pretty good guess at what somebody's gender is, and you can have a pretty good guess at what their ethnicity is, and you can certainly tell what color their skin is. So they're very visible elements. And some of the other things you're talking about, religion included, are not visible to others. And when you're talking about a topic like religion, it generally speaking, it requires somebody to let the others know that they have a faith.
Mhm.
And if they don't feel safe in doing that, then they won't do it. And sometimes you can guess what somebody's, whether they have we guess what their religion might be from their name, but many times you won't be able to guess that. And if you don't feel safe, people just won't talk about their faith in the workplace.
I love your perspective. I think mine is different, and that's why I want to learn from yours. And when I'm answering this, I'm answering yes, as the former global head of company culture at TikTok, and also I was the head of diversity and inclusion at TikTok for a while before that. So I'm kind of wearing my subject matter expert hat, but also my own personal experience as a woman of faith, being Jewish. And I think that one of the things we're seeing recently, not just since the murder of George Floyd, but most recently, is that strong connection between faith and political views and tensions, geopolitical tensions. So, faith from being a subject that can be spiritual and beautiful and connecting people, there is this assumption that it's something that separates people even more, and there's a huge tension around it. And I think when you're in the workplace or you're trying to grow your career, the last thing you want is tension, or the last thing you want people to assume around about you is your political views or where you come from in the world. So it's kind of to neutralize anything that can hinder your success. It's as if we're excluding faith from business, from the workplace, from relationships, connecting to where we spend most of our time, which is connecting to our professional kind of hats. But then, as you said, Jared, in the opening, we're kind of knowingly leaving a big part of ourselves outside of that context because, as you said, statistically, most of us believe in God, something that is not just us, etc. So that is hugely complicated. And as both of you are saying, but we kind of don't talk about it. So it's very uncomfortable. So this whole subject is under the surface, everyone can feel it, and it's hugely uncomfortable and actually becoming more tense.
Actually, I think that point that you've made about the assumptions that people make if you have a faith about your political views or about your views about society. I think that's what underpins the silence. That's such a great point.
Even from my own personal experience, I think sometimes for kind of that unintentional assumptions that people make is why I don't necessarily always share my faith because
Mm,
make a lot of assumptions about other beliefs based on that one.
mm,
But outside of that, what do you guys think are some other unconscionable bias or stereotypes about maybe specific faiths and how they manifest in the workplace, culture, policies? Um, where do you guys see that, and what are maybe some things that we can do to combat those unconscious bias?
I think that what you often see in the workplace or in business around faith is conversation around food
Mm,
and music and what people would wear. So the very kind of external elements of different faiths and kind of times in the year. And obviously, some of us would mention in companies big celebration moments of different people in the company or employees. So often it would be about food, music, and kind of those holidays that look great on pictures or on Instagram, right? Like a Christmas tree or Diwali, etc. Um, and what I have seen more often than not is that it kind of stays at that level, which is not very deep.
mm,
And what is fascinating that the more D&I became kind of evolved, I saw people asking less and less people, what does it mean to be who you are? I remember working at Facebook 10 years ago, people would ask me about my Judaism. For
mm,
some people, I was the first Jewish person that they met. They wanted to know, what does it mean? What does it mean to have a holy day in your week? And do you practice it or not? Recently, in the last few years, no one's asking me anything because it feels like a place that you don't want to go. So kind of paradoxically, like as we think we're evolving and becoming more progressive, people are so afraid, I
mhm.
think, to find out things that are different
mm.
that they avoid asking. So that I think that I expected for us to be here in 2026, people sharing, people asking, but I think people are asking less because they're afraid of what they're going to hear and how they're going to respond.
There's we're coming to that point about stereotypes. About there's kind of a view. This is that what our research found. We think it's the largest piece of research that's been carried out looking at religious expression in the workplace. Over 7,000 people responded, and you were quoting some of the details from that. We were just astonished by the response actually, and it felt like, thank goodness somebody's asked. And we had over 1,000 people in each of six faiths. So there was Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, Sikhism. So over 1,000 people in each of those. And one of the things that we found, and you summarized it lovely at the beginning, was that if you had a faith, regardless of the faith, you actually shared things in common.
Mhm.
And the difference was with people who didn't have a faith. So actually, this notion that Mikhail's talked about it very powerfully, actually, about her experience of having a faith at work. You keep it a secret. And so everybody's keeping it a secret, even though they're kind of people with a faith that actually have a lot in common with one another. And then some of the stereotypes. So if you have a faith, you're seen as being intolerant, for example. Generally speaking, you will have very fixed views about society and the way that people should conduct themselves. And then there are stereotypes about particular faiths. So there are particular views about Christians. I mean, the ones that are most powerful, I think, because they're most widely talked about, are stereotypes around Christians. I mean, it's a big group of people, around Muslims, and around Jews.
Mhm.
The interesting thing is if you take Muslims and Jews, the stereotypes associated with those groups, they're actually quite different. So with Muslims, actually, they're intolerant. They are backward looking. They're not interested in modernity. They are seeking. They're aggressive towards people who are not Muslims. So actually, kind of quite primitive in many ways. Quite primitive. With Jews, it's actually quite different. They're actually very sophisticated. They control the world. They occupy positions in finance and the media. So actually, we're all being controlled by them, but very negative on both, but very very different stereotypes associated with both of them. And actually, interestingly, the our research came out. The big piece of research came out in December of 2023. So in 2024, I was being asked the question, "What does your research tell you about the 7th of October?" And I was, well, nothing. It was like we didn't do it. And so I actually decided to do some research on anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in the light of 7th of October 2023, because nobody else was doing it. I thought, you're in the workplace. Sorry, it's in the workplace. So we're work psychologists, and actually found that there was an increase in Islamophobia, about 30% increase. People said that experienced, but for Jews, it was over 50% of people said that experience in the workplace. Now, we're not talking about outside, we're talking about in the workplace. There was an increase of 50%, and the workplace became less safe as a consequence of that. And the other thing is that it relates to the point that two of you were making earlier, actually, about whether you can see the difference or not. Actually, I felt so strongly about this research. I wanted to do it quickly. I actually did it all. We have a team of people. Normally, it's a team that does it. I get involved and look at the results. I actually did it all. I did the survey. I did the interviews. I did the focus groups, and the number of Jewish people who spoke to me, who told me, actually, I don't share my faith with people. I'm white. You couldn't tell from my name that I'm Jewish, and so conversations were being had in their workplaces about 7th of October and about Israel, and actually was just made the workplace very unsafe for people. And I wrote a book about psychological safety. It came out in November, and I used the anti-Semitism part of that research as a case study in how you can external events can make people feel psychologically unsafe at work. And it was interesting to see, it was interesting to hear that. But for Jewish people, it was like, I know somebody who was killed.
Mm.
I know somebody who was injured. My nephew's just been called up to the army. It was actually very direct. And it's just kind of understanding that was actually, it had a big impact on me, actually, just realizing how close this was. And whilst I was doing the interviews and focus groups, that tragic event of the girls who got murdered in Southport took place. And then you had the anti-immigration, anti-Muslim riots. And all of a sudden, you had exactly the same feelings, that same feeling of threat, fear, insecurity with the Muslim community was a mirror of what the Jewish community had been experiencing since the 7th of October.
You make me think about something that I've been speaking with leaders and people in the workplace around this sense of threat. I think two points to mention. It's almost like there isn't a word to express this element of identity that people have with faith, because faith sounds so religious, yet so many people don't practice. It's almost race, because I was born Jewish. My mother is Jewish. It's almost it's my skin color. It doesn't show maybe on my skin, but I am born Jewish, like officially. So this kind of how to describe this thing is very hard. And I think for some people, this element that others would call faith, it's kind of being part of a people. So it's almost like we are missing some language to explain how the individual or the community feel connecting to that religion that they're part of, identity that they're part of. I'm fascinated to read like your most recent research in the context of the workplace. And when you feel like you're a part of a people, it's very possible that there's no one else like you in the building. But you feel connected to someone, as you said, that could be so many miles away from you physically, but your strong identity is to that essence, that heritage, that history. How can you bring it to the workplace? People will think that you're not rational, that it doesn't make sense. So I think this whole sensitivity around faith, it's also like, I'm going to sound ancient. I work in tech and social media. How can I talk about 3,000 years back when what they're looking for me is to show how advanced I am on AI. So these tensions
mm,
are also connected to what's going on in companies right now.
mm, mm,
Actually, less human connection, more machine connection, etc., etc. So I think that that element really doesn't help. But
mm,
touching on what Bina just said about the sense of threat, I often think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs
mm,
and how so many people, as you mentioned, after the riots, Muslim people, Jewish people after the 7th of October, they're expected to go to work and impress and talk about their
mm,
KPIs and presentations and,
mm,
pitch to clients when their very basic needs of
mm,
safety, physical safety,
mm,
psycholo. I asked my kids to take their yarmulkes off their head and I'm not proud of it.
mm,
I'm actually not proud of it. I don't want to say ashamed because I know
mm,
because fear sometimes makes you do things that you wouldn't do really.
mm,
But I asked them to take off their physical representation of who we are.
mm,
That's painful.
mm,
And at the same time, I went to work and I said, be yourself.
mm,
So think about these tensions that people are dealing with. On the one
mm,
hand, they're trying to be so modern and relevant in AI, but they're telling their children, don't be who you are now. It's really not safe. Can you just wait a
mm,
minute? So that's kind of for me, Maslow's tension. We're
mm,
trying to be on the level 5, but our level 1 is really not maintained.
mm,
Well, and I wonder because you're talking earlier about how a lot of when we looked at religious beliefs in the workplace, it was about food or things like that. It was the very simple aspects of faith, and I think for many organizations, just out of fear of legal or political insensitivity around religion, I think we stayed at that basic level because, like, you could do the food, and if you got that wrong, it wasn't such a big deal. But I think now, as we're discussing this conversation, it's gotten to the point of to kind of speak about religion or in your case, it's much more than religion. It's who that person is. It's
mm,
it's their birthright. I think organizations are afraid of kind of stoking more fear, more anger, just because of what's happening in the world, just politically. So how do we, as organizations, how would you suggest we start to move past that to not only make people feel more safe in expressing who they are and their beliefs, but also for those of us who may not share those beliefs, how can we talk about those things um, where we might even disagree with what's happening in other parts of the world based on politics and religion, but we can still look at a person and try to understand who they are?
I think I agree with everything you said, and I think organizations don't want to have conversations around religion. I think some of it is based around fear. I think some of it is just based around complacency.
Hmm.
The because we think we're doing it already. So I actually like the expression that bring your whole self to work. So we talk about inclusion, we talk about bringing your whole self to work. That sounds lovely. There was a survey done. We've got legislation, so religion is a protected
Mhm.
characteristic. And Mikhail's point actually about race, actually the Sikhs and Jews are actually seen as a ethnicity as well as a religion. So this point about identity is kind of layered. There are different layers of meaning there for Jews and Sikhs. So you got legislation, you got this wonderful expression and the intention. A survey from the CIPD of HR managers, over 90%, so practically every organization said when it comes to religion, we are inclusive. So what's the problem? And I think the fact that we got over 7,000 people responding to our work is that nobody's asked the people who have a faith.
Mm.
And I've come across people who could say, yeah, yeah, good, great research, really interesting. Thank goodness we are inclusive when it comes to religion in our workplace. And so, how do you know that? It's the people who are not saying anything who are the ones who, back to your point about silencing, they're the ones who should be speaking up and saying, I don't feel safe here talking about my faith. So I'm just disagreeing with you slightly. I think it's
Sure.
partly fear and I think it's partly complacency.
On Bina's point, I'm happy to touch what you covered, what you asked before, Jared. But on Bina's point, on your point about the workplace and avoidance, assuming that many people that are listening to us are in comms, marketing, PR, they're thinking about how to get people's attention, what matters to people. I have this hypothesis that faith will become bigger and bigger as people look for purpose.
Mhm.
And again, it's not based on research like Bina, so I'm sorry, I'm not a researcher on this subject. I'm just seeing, I'm kind of live more on the social media, kind of different feeds.
Mm,
And yes, my hope is that different faiths will find more what's in common, what they have in common than rather than what separates them. And that's a general statement to the world. We became obsessed
Mhm.
about finding what separates us rather than becoming curious to know what connects us. And
mm,
that's why I'm also disappointed from the diversity and inclusion world that I was part of.
mm,
I got it to a certain stage when it was only about what's different and not
mm,
what's in common. And I
mm,
feel people, human beings, want to find something in common with another person,
mm,
regardless of if they're finding it hard to pronounce their name because they're so different to the people that they grew up with, etc., etc. I think it's a wise thing for anyone in comms marketing to think about how they use this in a positive way because people
Mhm.
are looking for reasons to be here. Like why am I here? What's meaningful? Purpose.
mm,
Purpose is back in a really big way. Um, I'm very much together with Bina. It's not just, it is fear. Everything thinks, people think everything's okay.
mm,
Leaders still believe their employee engagement surveys. They think that people write their everything just the way they feel it. That's not the case. I stopped kind of relying on employee surveys because people are nervous about what they write and what indications they give. And I think there needs to be a kind of a wake-up call
mm,
because it's happening. And actually, it's very possible that people will care more about their religious beliefs, about believing in something that is they can't really express at work. I had
mm,
this fascinating panel just before the 7th of October, and Bina, I know you'll understand this so well, and everyone else. Just before the 7th of October, we had a panel in this financial institution, and I was representing like Jewish faith. There was someone Muslim, Sikh, Hindu, Christian. We had all kind of the main, and it was beautiful. We could have,
mm,
we were all also dressed like just more traditional way. And,
mm,
we weren't hugging each other because many of our faiths kind of don't, from modesty, don't encourage physical connection, but with someone that's not yours, your spouse. But there was so much warmth and
mm,
we found so many things that we had in common and we were fascinated by the other person's faith. It was so positive and
mm,
so optimistic. And
mm,
so many of our faiths are about family and connection. I think if anyone is in that space, think about how to put the spotlight on what connects different faiths. Of course, encourage people to be proud of their unique identity. But I think we became also in the workplace obsessed more with separation rather than connecting. And I think we're paying the price right now.
mm,
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. And one of the takeaways that our audience can take away um, is that I think in PR we tend to do that sometimes, and in communications without realizing it. We create all these separate groups for people that we want to feel included, and I
mm,
think sometimes we inadvertently start creating more of a division
mm,
because we're doing that than we are kind of bringing people together and sharing what we have in common and trying to build each other up. So I kind of want to ask you, kind of in that vein, what are brands missing as far as opportunities around kind of engaging with religious groups or with the various religions of their constituents or their employees? And also, are they risking backlash if they're not engaging?
Bina and I do similar work with companies, and I'm guessing that we work with fantastic brands
mm,
that have really good intent, and they
Mhm.
want their employees and their clients and everyone that has to do with their brand or their products or their services, they want them to feel safe and seen and all those positive things that we aspire for in the workplace. I think that one of the downsides of this kind of post diversity and inclusion hype period was that I think it was just after George Floyd's murder, and
mm,
which for me was a very meaningful life event because
mm,
I did not understand what it means to be a black mother in the US or generally speaking. And I had to really educate myself. There was a very strong sense of do not ask Black people about their experience. Go and educate yourself. There was this sense that they shouldn't be also answering with all the pain and all the fear, like educating others, and you should go and kind of educate yourself.
Mm,
And I think there was this sense of almost like shame that you don't
mm,
understand a one people or one race experience. And I think people stopped having conversations out
Mm.
of that fear. And I am going back to that fear element because my book is called What Would You Do If You Weren't Afraid? So
mm,
I'm very interested in fear, generally speaking.
mm,
I think one of the first things that people can bring PR, comms, marketing people to the workplace is just humanity back.
mm,
Ask people, what do you care about? What makes you you? People just avoid those conversations completely. So I think it's this kind of people being less afraid actually to connect.
mm,
Well, and I think to your point, I think we have to have a lot of those conversations because I think sometimes we automatically start assuming, like, if we talk to one Muslim or one Jew or one Christian, that now we kind of understand that religion and what everyone within that religion believes. And correct me if you think differently, but from my understanding, not every Christian thinks the same, not every Muslim thinks the same, and I'm assuming not every Jew thinks the same. So I think we have to have a lot of those conversations before we can actually start to understand. And the less we're doing that, the really, I guess, the more behind it puts us. Because to your point, there could be Jews living in Israel that have one kind of outlook on politics and religion and things that are happening, and you could meet another Jew who's, was raised in the US and is kind of far removed from being in Israel, and their thinking and their beliefs may be completely different. So I
mm,
think we also have to realize that no religion is like a monolith. We don't all think the same way.
What
mm,
does it mean to you? If
Yeah.
someone's sharing or openly being themselves. So on that panel, we had one of our panelists was Hindu, and she was saying how
Mm.
she believes in karma.
mm,
And she was a very senior leader in financial services. And she said when she makes decisions on a leadership level, she's thinking about karma. And maybe this thing will, she'll have to deal with it in a different, live or stage
mm,
or, and I thought that was fascinating that
mm,
when someone's making a business decision, they're thinking about karma.
mm,
I find it inspiring.
mm,
Normally, you would assume someone would think about the strategy, the P&L, what's it going to look like? What are my
mm,
shareholders going to say? Will I get HR support? She's thinking karma.
mm,
So
Mm.
how meaningful it is for me as someone that's potentially going to work with her, or she could be my client, to understand that she's wired to karma as well as other things.
yeah.
But because people don't ask, what does it mean? What does it mean to be Hindu? For you, then they'll never know that.
Mm. And I think that's an element of religious expression. So it's what we talk about. It's our symbols that we wear. And actually, as you said in our research, we actually found that half of our sample would wear religious symbols outside of work. Was it 25%? Anyway, quite a high number would wear. Only a quarter of those would wear them in work, and only 4% of them felt comfortable doing it. So even when they were doing it, they felt uncomfortable. Since the 7th of October, I met quite a number of talked to quite a number of Jews actually as part of the research. They're saying, "I hide my Star of David." When you have people of faith in your workplace, the research shows, not our research, but the research more generally shows, they are more ethical in their decision making. But you would never, but that people would never say, actually, my faith would never allow me to do that. And the media does like to highlight those individuals who have a faith, who have, done things which are dubious, if not unethical. So we highlight those people. So we form the view that people who have a faith are obviously very hypocritical. The truth is, they're not.
A question I wanted to ask, and we've kind of started talking about this, is I wanted to ask you if we were to kind of just pull out three practical steps that PR or comms agencies or internal teams can start doing tomorrow that would make employees with religious beliefs feel more seen or valued or safe. And I know, Mikhail, you just said, have those conversations. So I think that might be one practical step is to reach out to those employees within our organizations of different religious beliefs and start having those conversations. But what are a couple other steps that either one of you can think of that might be good for our audience to hear that they can start doing tomorrow?
I think that I would pick out the role of leaders. And it does the link into what Mikhail was just saying, actually, that I agree with her totally, actually, that the diversity and inclusion has become one of those topics, irrespective of what's happened in the last year. Even before that, the last 10, 15 years, people go, there's so much concern about if I use the wrong word, if I use the wrong expression or the wrong acronym, or I have the acronym but the letters in the wrong order, the whole world that will kind of tumble on my shoulders. I'm better. It will embarrass me. Worse, it'll embarrass the corporation. I'm not going to say anything.
Mhm.
And I think I think that leaders themselves need to kind of move into this space, but also be honest about it. I'm going to talk about, and so just be quite open. I'm going to talk about diversity and inclusion. I'm going to talk about religious inclusion. I hope you know my intention is not to offend.
Mhm.
Should I cause offense, it will be unintentional. So do feel free to come and tell me how I put it straight, and how I can learn from this. But please try not to make your first response anger.
Yeah.
And if you kind of say something, and I know leaders who have done this, I'm sure Mikhail kind of just will know the same. Actually, where people have kind of been open like that, um, people understand where they're coming from and empathize more about the difficulty about talking about some of these things. But when they talk about diversity and inclusion, incorporate religion within that.
Mhm. And I think we have to have a little bit of grace for each other on both sides, whether it's leadership or the employees. I think we have to allow each other to, as you said, step into these conversations,
Mm,
knowing that we're going to mess up,
mm,
and we'll fix it when someone points out that we've messed up, but not to immediately jump to being offended and being angry, but
mm,
instead use it as an opportunity to teach one another.
I
mm,
think often these things, these kind of discussions or open forums happen after something terrible happens
mm,
and people are hurt and defensive and scared. So how do you bring this more to the day to day rather than like the crisis management, kind of led by HR and the CEO, make sure that everyone's happy, etc. Um, I also think that it can be, um, we can use words that we all feel comfortable with to try to take all that tension off from the subject. So
mm,
if people feel more comfortable with words like purpose or meaning or matters or care, so just have these discussions around words that everyone can relate to, or
mm,
even education. um, just make it more safe to talk about these subjects. There is a terrible labeling around this. And
mm,
it's, sorry to use this word, it's like very like not sexy to be a person of faith in the workplace.
mm,
I'm speaking like generally speaking. If I was in PR, comms, marketing, and I would try to challenge myself to think about, and I think your research is like mind blowing. If so many people care about this,
mm,
people will do things connected to what they care about. So you actually have an opportunity to awaken this thing that people care about. And it's great potentially for business,
mm,
for comms, for engagement. How do you do it in a way that is different, not political, more humanistic, more colorful, more inclusive, even though I'm not using that word anymore because it's kind of connected to something that we're trying to evolve from. So my advice would be, not in a time of crises, bring this kind of more to the day to day, words that people can relate to, much more human. I
mm,
remember when I joined Facebook, about maybe 10 years ago, 11 years ago, my manager, based in Ireland, asked me, and I never heard that question from a leader before, and it's going to shock you. He asked me, he worked really hard on pronouncing my name, and he said, Michal, what do you care about? And I was never asked that. Like it was so hard to get into Facebook, all those interviews. I was like ready to take orders. I was, imposter syndrome, everything. Suddenly this leader is asking me what I care about. And immediately, without even thinking, and I write about this in the book, I said, I care about being a mother, an Israeli, and a Jew. I freaked out as if I gave him my top three
mm,
biggest vulnerabilities. Like,
mm,
Yeah.
I was so scared, going back. I felt like, oh my gosh, like I ruined this whole thing for me
mm,
because he's gonna think I can't rely on this person.
mm,
She's committed to her kids.
mm,
She is connected to a country that is like, controversial potentially, and she's a woman of faith.
mm,
And his response couldn't have been more meaningful. He said,
mm,
I don't know anything about Judaism. What does it mean to you? That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Mm.
So, and I kind of passed it like, and when I had colleagues that had a different faith to me, I learned from him to ask them, what does it mean to you?
Mm.
Wow.
So how can you do that at scale? Because ChatGPT won't do it for you.
Right.
How can you do it at scale,
Mm.
even for those people around you? And by the way, I'm sometimes frustrated for Christians because it's kind of a faith that's taken for granted. You
Mm.
know, it's like, yeah, we get it's kind of like bring that back, right?
Mm.
Because I really think that there's something unfair with Christianity. And I'm telling you, I work with many kind of corporate America
Mm.
companies that I'm guessing most employees identified in one level or another more with Christianity. And it was like a nothing to talk about.
Mm.
And I also want to be educated. And
Mhm.
that's the last word I want to mention, educate.
Mm.
Educate. Just help people learn things. People love learning something at work and then telling their spouse, telling their children. They love it because people want to learn. It's just that very often we're limited in our, the kind of the workplace, we're kind of repetible. But I think that's the last thing I would say. How can you play a role, if I had to kind of a tip or advice, how can you play a role in educating people that they'll feel inspired?
Mm.
I know we're kind of getting to the end of our time, so I wanted to ask one last question because this has been very enlightening for me, and you guys have given me a lot to think about. So I hope those who listen later also come away the same way. But if there was one cultural mindset shift that PR and comms teams and agencies could adopt after hearing this conversation, for each of you, what would that mindset shift be?
For me, is try to find what connects people, what they have in common, and those bridges between the different
Mm.
faiths, the different cultures. How beautiful are bridges they connect,
Mhm.
and obsess less about separation. I know it's often about categories and boxes and drawers and what separates one for the other because people define often what this project is about as opposed like just you need that separation for
Mhm.
meaning. I find meaning through bridges and and connecting points rather than what separates. Maybe PR and comms can do more of that.
And just be aware when we talk about diversity and inclusion, are we really talking about that, or are we talking about race and women? You know what I mean? Are we talking about minorities and women? Because
Mhm.
I think a lot of the conversations around diversity are about very visible groups, and we should talk about them. I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about them, but it's not, is that truly diverse? And there are so many other things we could be talking about. And as you said, as you set this up at the beginning, 85% of the people on this planet have a faith. And and you just got to recognize that faith is important to people. Mikhail said something earlier, which is really powerful. And it came out from you were talking about yourself, but I've heard this reflected in other people. People have said to me, people look at me and they can see the color of my skin and think my racial identity is actually my most important thing. It isn't. It's the thing they can't see, which is more important to my identity, is my faith. Whether I'm a Muslim or a Christian or whatever it is, that's more important to me. So people talk to me about race. I want to talk about my faith.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think your last point, Mina, was amazing. And I often think that way. As a Christian myself, you know, for me, and I'm assuming for most others, I can't distinguish where me as a person and me as a what my faith is.
Mm.
So that's why it's important. It kind of encompasses everything I do.
Mm.
And so, people often say, well, you have to kind of leave your faith and go to your work. And it's like I couldn't do that if I wanted to.
Mm.
So I think it's important what you said and that people understand that the things that we can't see, which is people's faith and what they believe in, is a lot more important than the things that we can see. And I think we've focused a lot on what we can see. And so maybe that's the big takeaway today for our audience is to look more at those things that we can't see.
Mm.
I want to thank you both again for
Thank you.
joining us today. This has been an amazing conversation. I think, at least for me, I could keep going because I think there's a lot more we could dive into. But I really appreciate you guys taking the time. It's been great.